As many of you know, the World Series of Poker is just around the corner, but did you know that the only way to qualify online for the WSOP is through 888 Poker, where they run satellites all the time and they're as cheap as 1 cent?
1 cent.
1 cent.
That's crazy
Yes.
cheap. That's as cheap as it gets, for sure. If you're a first-time depositor, you can use the code POKERGUYS. When you deposit $10, you get 20 more bucks from them. You also get $88 just for signing up and a 100% deposit bonus up to $400. You got to use the code, though.
That's a lot of great deals, plus winning your way to the WSOP. Get on 888.
It's a no-brainer.
Phil Ivey. This guy is amazing. He plays differently than most players in the world, maybe every player in the world, because he puts himself in a lot of tough situations and sometimes finds a way out in the way nobody else could. That might be the case in the hand we're going to show you today.
But it might not also, because in this hand, which is a cash game hand, he's up against David Benyamine and Patrik Antonius, two of the best players in the world, especially at the time. And so it ain't going to be so easy to extricate himself out of this particular trap.
I don't know. It's Phil Ivey. He's pretty special.
Yeah.
This was suggested on Twitter again by Greg DC. Second suggestion in very short order. Good job, Greg.
Way to go.
If you have a suggestion for the breakdown, tweet at us. Include a YouTube link.
We're going to break down this hand as we go, so get ready for some analysis.
Cool.
He not only played good, he ran pretty good too. A couple of times he got away from hands because the cards helped him out. But he did play very well.
He ran good, he played good, and he's got a great smile and a great guy.
Cool. 600.
No straddle this time.
Bunch of limpers.
And it is a bunch of limpers.
Could start the avalanche effect, meaning when one person calls, start to see a lot of other callers.
He got me literally 3 to 4 months or whatever.
So he's got no chance of hitting runs like winning, and then when he's stuck, he goes.
Gus Hansen with Queen 9.
Is this our first family pot of the cash game?
It could be. What exactly is a family pot?
Means every player is in the hand.
King, king, deuce.
This is interesting. Wow. Hold on a second.
Check.
King, king, deuce.
Check.
We have two players
Check.
with trip kings. Antonius with trip kings. Ivey with trip kings.
Bet 3,000.
Antonius is trip kings with a jack kicker, dominating Ivey.
Cool.
And Benyamine with the flush draw as well. We might see some action from him in this flop.
I'm not one of them.
Pass. Pass.
This is an action flop, to say the least.
Cool.
But Benyamine's not stupid. He knows a paired board. He's not going to play a flush draw that strong, is he?
No, but I knew he would at least see this turn card.
We've only played 501K.
Oh, wow. What a card for Benyamine's hand.
And look at this. Benyamine
Check.
has the flush on the turn.
Check.
Other than that, we don't. No.
Ivey and Antonius with trip kings. Ivey in terrible shape. He needs a 7 to win it, a deuce or a 4 to tie. Antonius needs a jack to win, or a deuce and a 4.
Bet 10,000.
I don't blame Patrik Antonius. It has to feel like he's got the best hand, but the only thing that's suspicious about this is he's got 2 callers. There's only one other king left in the deck. So I don't know if I'm Patrik Antonius if I bet there or not.
Cool.
You start looking at that board and you start thinking, okay, well, one of my opponents has to have a king, and the other one might have diamonds.
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me.
Now, normally I wouldn't put one of my opponents on king, deuce, or king 4, but this pot was limped. There's only 600 to play. So king, deuce suited, king 4 suited, those are the kind of hands somebody might be in there with.
Cool.
Well,
Call.
go to the river.
Unlike the commentator Robert Williamson, who both defends and admonishes Patrick's bet here, we're just going to take one side and say we do not like this bet.
It's a really strange bet. Actually, Robert Williamson does get it right at least some of the time. It seems very likely someone's going to have diamonds on this board.
Especially David Benyamine.
Yeah.
Let's think about this for a second. Does David Benyamine ever have a king here? And that would mean we're hoping for a worse king, obviously, as Patrick, right? But on the flop, would David really check a king?
It's not likely. Maybe if he somehow had a king with a bad kicker, but how does he show up with a king with a bad kicker?
He limped under the gun. Why would he have that?
Even though he limped, he's still under the gun.
Yeah.
He's not going to show up with king 7 suited like Ivey has or something.
Right. So we have to be worried, first of all, about Ivey having a flush. Then we have to be worried about Benyamine having a flush. And it feels a lot like Benyamine has a flush because what else does he have? If he doesn't have a king, does he have a pair of 6s? I don't think he's overcalling on the flop with a pair of 6s. Even a pair of aces or queens, which maybe he's trying to slow play, is questionable to call on the flop.
The flop play totally defines Benyamine's range, and it feels very, very likely he's got exactly what he has, which is a reasonable flush here.
Right. So we don't like Patrick's bet for that reason.
Right.
Now we got to get to the next thing, which is Ivey's call.
Yeah.
Because, like we just said, it looks a lot like Benyamine has a flush. And forget about Benyamine for a second. Patrick bet King Jack, and we didn't like that. We think when Patrick has value, it's usually better than King Jack. So what is Ivey doing here?
Well, okay. From Ivey's point of view, it does look like Benyamine has a flush. It also looks like Patrick has a flush.
It does, yeah.
It's hard for both of them to have flush because they would block each other, but it's possible, and that's what it looks like they have. So as Ivey, you may be sitting there thinking, actually, all of my outs are good here. I've got 10 outs to win a lot of the time, and certainly when the board pairs, at worst, I'm going to be chopping almost always.
Right.
But usually maybe winning the whole pot. That must be part of what it is.
And if a 7 comes, we're going to get a ton of money, right?
That's got to be another piece. The implied odds of hitting a 7 where they wouldn't see it coming, and then they're going to have to pay off even more.
But that cannot be a profitable play in the long run to decide that's how I'm going to play it as Phil Ivey.
Yeah.
But it's Phil Ivey, and I know a lot of you are going to say, you guys are giving Phil Ivey too much credit. Well, guess what? It's Phil Ivey. He deserves the credit. We've seen him do amazing things before.
Yeah.
He probably has a list of cards in his head that don't improve him, that come on the river, that he thinks he can bluff on, that
Right.
he can win. He can find his way out of this crazy tornado, because otherwise this is just a bad turn call.
So as Phil, your plan has got to be, sometimes I fill up or make quads, and that's good.
Yeah.
Although hard to get a lot more value unless I hit
Yeah.
exactly a 7, which is why we need some bluffs in there too somehow. It's hard to come up with bluffs, but you have to have, like Grant said, a range of cards you're going to turn into a bluff on the river.
Right, which is cool. It's all very cool, but to simplify things, we don't like this call, and it's kind of bad, like in a vacuum.
Oh yeah, if you're not Phil Ivey, don't do this.
Yeah.
This is almost never going to work, especially against really good players.
Right.
But when you're the best around, you know, you can dance through the raindrops.
Maybe you can do it a little bit.
Yeah, this pot, 44,000. Here's the river.
5.
5 of diamonds. That's going to be an action killer.
I was going to say that's going to crush the action because now there's 4 to a flush on the board.
Well, Patrick and Phil, they dodged the bullet on that one.
Check.
For me, not for them. For me,
You know, Benyamine at the same time now, I mean, obviously he's got the winner, but at the same time, you know, he can't beat a full house and he can't beat an ace of diamonds.
Wow, I think
Bet 40,000.
Phil Ivey's plowing into this.
Think about the way the hand was played. If you're Benyamine, you go, okay, well, maybe one of my opponents has a king. Is there a chance the other one's got an ace of diamonds?
Exactly the hand I believe Phil Ivey's trying to represent.
You've also got to imagine there's a chance that Ivey's got a full house here.
Absolutely, could be 2's full. I mean, that's the other consideration.
I mean, a lot of people at home are watching this going, wow, got the queen high flush. Well, it's actually a king high flush, but he's got a queen in his hand. Benyamine can raise this. There's no way he raises.
And
This
Patrik Antonius already folded.
is an easy fold for Antonius. But if you're Benyamine,
It's a tough call.
yeah,
It really is.
when it's only a 1 card to a flush, if you don't have the nuts, it's a tough spot.
Absolutely. Especially the way Phil Ivey not doing a thing until the 4th diamond came. I mean, it feels like he has the ace of diamonds. If I didn't know better, I would have thought he had ace of diamonds.
Yeah, he could also be in there. I mean, look, he's got king 7. Would it really be shocking if he turned over king 4?
Actually, no, it wouldn't be. On a limped pot, yeah. I think he is going to play a king 4 suit.
Well, obviously, as he played
Or
a king
king
7,
5
what's
suited.
the difference between king 5 and king 4 and king 7? There's no difference at all.
Not much at all.
And Benyamine knows that. Benyamine has a lot of experience with Ivey.
I wouldn't be surprised if Benjamin lays his hand down.
There's no bluff in this spot. I don't see how you can possibly be bluffing.
It's a tough spot, tough decision for David Benyamine.
I don't see how. I just can't believe you would hit the 5.
David Benyamine trying to make sense of this hand.
Such a fickle game, poker is. He looks at the flop, he goes, oh, sort of like the flop. Looks at the turn, he goes, oh, wow, I love the turn. And the river comes out. Ugh.
Don't think you're going to get a read on Phil Ivey.
No, Ivey gives him nothing.
Wow, that's power poker. He had the 3rd best hand and ends up taking down the pot.
Oh my god.
It seems like nothing ever goes wrong for Phil Ivey when we do cash game hands or even tournament hands with him. But wow, does he extricate himself from this situation. He goes from the 3rd best hand to the best hand only because no one else is left in the hand.
Yeah, because he's Phil Ivey.
Because he's the Phil.
He's the Philinator. And how did he do this? This is crazy. Because if you look at it up until the turn, it's kind of like Phil's playing this hand like garbage, right? It's kind of like not really great what he's doing when he's calling the turn there. But he's Phil Ivey. And here's the thing about Phil Ivey. He might make some suboptimal plays at some points in hands, but he is special. He finds his way out of those spots more than anybody else and makes up for that.
If you know you can get yourself out of the disaster area, then you can sort of wander into it more of the time successfully. And that, I think, sort of what Phil's doing here. Betting a diamond on the river must have been part of the plan when he called on the turn. It had to have been.
Right.
So he's going to bluff that card. And the really important thing is he's not representing a flush when he does this.
What do you mean, Jonathan? Explain that to me a little bit.
Let's think about it. He bets $40,000 on a paired board where it's clear Benyamine has a flush
Yes,
at this
it
point.
is.
And probably Patrik does too.
Yep.
Right? Not always. Sometimes he can have full houses. Sometimes he can have other things.
And either of them can have the nut flush, by the way.
Absolutely.
Right.
So Phil is betting $40,000. If Phil had the ace of diamonds, he would never bet $40,000 because what worse hands can call a pot-sized bet when he's betting into two players on this board? It isn't the queen of diamonds, I'll tell you that. It's better hands than that.
Yeah.
So Phil's repping a full house here.
He's repping a full house and a full house only.
Yeah.
What he really has to worry about, because his plan is contingent on his opponents folding flushes, right?
Right.
What he really has to worry about is if Antonius sometimes shows up with a full house. We don't think Benyamine really ever does the way the hand played out.
Really hard.
But Antonius sometimes could. So what is Phil repping? That's a big question here because it's not a flush.
I mean, I think Phil mostly is repping King 5 suited, which is a very thin range for sure. He could sometimes have King 4 and have been slow playing it on the turn.
Right, he has the board so crushed, and if he raises the turn, he might fold out some flushes, so it makes sense to have King 4 as well.
Yeah, but mostly King 5, and we know he can just call with that sort of trip kings and, kicker that's got nothing going on for it because he did with King 7,
Right, but would you really expect that?
No.
Which makes King 4 a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah.
He's also Phil Ivey, so he's kind of tricky. So sometimes maybe he could have deuces full, and sometimes maybe even 4s full.
Maybe.
But certainly that's a very thin range, and it's kind of hard to make that work for your opponents. But just for a second, put yourself in David Benyamine's seat. Think about this for a second. What is Phil Ivey betting 40,000 with that's a bluff?
Right.
How does he ever show up with a bluff here? What Phil Ivey is doing is way ahead of his time. He's turning trips into a bluff, which is now pretty common among high-level players.
I mean,
not common. You see it sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool play. Turning trips into a bluff on a scary board. And the reason it's so cool here is because it looks like Phil Ivey can't have a bluff. The only bluff that makes sense is trips, but why would you turn trips into a bluff is what David Benyamine is thinking.
Especially when you've got Patrik behind you who absolutely can have the nut flush.
Right.
But Phil sort of takes care of all of that by saying, the nut flush can't really call anyway. I'm repping a much stronger hand than that. So if Patrik has a full house, congratulations, you get $40,000. Otherwise, I get the pot, because what's anyone going to do here?
Right, so if you're still questioning what we're saying about Ivey having no real bluffs in his range except for turning trips into a bluff, think for a second through the entire hand. What bluffs does he have? He never has 7-8 of spades. He never has ace-9 offsuit. He doesn't have any of those hands because he bet the flop and called the turn.
He closed the action calling the turn even. It isn't like someone bet and he called in position hoping everyone else would fold and they'd be heads up. He knew that it was going to be 3 ways going to the river. It looks so strong when then he bets the river here. Looks like he's trying to get called by exactly the ace of diamonds.
Right, so he doesn't have that many full houses for value, but that is his value. And when he has a bluff, it has to be trips that turns into a bluff, which at this time in poker was unheard of.
And honestly, even now, it's very hard to account for that. So there are actually a lot of points that we either disagreed with or we thought were crazy intense above the rim. Phil Ivey calling on the turn pretty out there. Patrik Antonius betting the turn pretty out there. And then Phil Ivey, of course, making this incredible play on the river. What do you think about these decisions? Do you agree with the poker guys? Do you think we're cray-cray? Let us know in the comments. We're going to respond to our favorite ones right up here.
No matter what you think about what we thought, Phil Ivey doing that is awesome.
Yeah.
It's super cool, and he does stuff like that a lot, which is why we've broken down a ton of Phil Ivey hands. Check him out by clicking up here.
And if you're one of those people who thinks like, they said that thing, they didn't really explain it, I want to know more about this, I want to know more about the turn play, we do it all in our podcast called The Breakdown. I know it's the same name as the video, but still, The Breakdown presented by the Poker Guys. We spent 45 minutes talking about this hand, getting
55 actually.
Well, hello.
Yeah.
Getting super deep into, is this a good bet by Patrik on the turn? Is this a good call by Phil on the turn? Ultimately, not just this time, but overall, are these profitable plays? If you want to learn more about that, check it out.
Also pre-flop and flop and everything.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
The whole deal for sure. And if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.